Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our third Bristol Cycling Campaign webinar, this one on tackling dangerous driving. We've got some really interesting speakers lined up to give a national context and a local context to dangerous driving, what we can do about it, and how we can work together to improve. Bristol Cycling Campaign are a voluntary organisation. We work to make cycling safer in Bristol and the surrounding area, mainly focused on the city of Bristol though, to be fair. We're completely run by volunteers and supported by our members who join and pay a small fee, a very small fee, or at least a free to join at the moment for the first year. So thank you to our members who have enabled us to put on this webinar free of charge through the donations that they provide. We're going to start with Duncan Dollimore from Cycling UK, who's going to talk to us about the national picture of sort of enforcement and dangerous driving. Then we're going to hear from Amy at Action Vision Zero, and finally we're going to hear from Simon Brickwood from Avon and Somerset Police. We're not going to have questions after each speaker, but we'll combine those questions at the end, and I'll make notes of the questions as they come through. If you've got a question, feel free to put it in the chat, but try to avoid too much back and forth conversation in the chat because it can get very, very confusing. And yeah, let's begin. Duncan, shall we hand over screen sharing to you, and we can crash on.
Okay, well, thanks very much for that introduction, and good evening, everybody. Just to start with, thanks to everybody at Bristol Cycling Campaign for inviting me and the other speakers here today. I've had quite a lot of talk about road justice, policing and enforcement and dangerous driving. They asked me to deal with some of the national picture, and I was given quite a long list of issues that perhaps to touch upon. So I thought, rather than trying to do every one of those justice in 10 minutes, the best thing to do was to give a bit of a general overview of why this is important to the people that have arranged this, why it's so important to Amy, who you're about to hear from next, and why at Cycling UK we've been campaigning around road safety and particularly road justice for so many years. So apologies to those who know lots about this subject. There's going to be a real fly past to give a bit of introduction in the next 8 minutes to what the others are going to speak about, acknowledging that I'm not the expert about things in Avon and Somerset. So why does this matter? Well, I'm going to start with a statement: road crime is real crime, which seems a bit of an odd one to be starting with. It's a phrase that I can't take credit for. Amy, when she was at Road Peace, came up with this phrase, and we used it in a campaign a few years ago for the Police and Crime Commissioner elections, when we were trying to persuade police and crime commissioners to commit a larger proportion of their resources and funding to roads policing. But it's really relevant to how people think about road crime. I started my working life working in the magistrates' courts as a legal advisor, and it was really odd. People would turn up at court charged with something, and the clerk, which was my job, would ask them whether they had any previous convictions. And lots of people would say things like, well, no, I don't have any previous, I've never been in trouble before, I've got no convictions. Well, I've got some road traffic. I've been done for excess alcohol. I've been done for driving while disqualified, but nothing proper. And that was people's response regularly to whether they had any convictions. And you may not have heard that comment before, but most of you will have heard people saying things like, well, I was only doing 42 in the 30. And well, I don't know what happened. I just didn't see him. As though that's an explanation for what happened when somebody collides with a pedestrian, somebody's driving and hits a cyclist. almost as though that's the explanation in itself, followed when somebody appears at court with the suggestion, well, I can't lose my license. I've got the kids to drop off, or I've got this to do. And the approach to that is, well, my license and my right to drive is more important than safety or dealing with justice issues. But it's an odd one because we do treat road crime societally different to other crimes. And one of the reasons for that is that it's just about one of the few crimes where people sitting on a jury or magistrates or even Joe Public, they can sort of imagine themselves committing. Most of you listening tonight won't imagine yourself appearing before the court charged with a burglary or an offence like that, but there's lots of people who put themselves in the shoes of others when it comes to motoring crime. And that affects their perception of how serious it is and how seriously we should take it. And you can see that with the way some of the media report on road crime. So how many times have you picked up that newspaper report where the report is there was a collision between the cyclist and the car? The car collided with the cyclist. It wasn't the driver in the car sprouted wings and was suddenly autonomous and was involved in the vehicle. And there's a lack of personal responsibility for it. And we play that game, and that's the societal response to things. And that affects the resources that people put into things, including the resources sometimes that the police put into roads policing. Some stunning statistics over recent years. I promise I'm not going to do much on stats today, but I can't help but mention this one. Over a 10-year period outside London, roads policing in England reduced in numbers by 47%. So as we had austerity from 2009 onwards, every time police cuts were made, and the police service was cut, and they did have to make cuts across the board. But what happened was every time the cuts came, they were felt hardest on roads policing. And the reason for that was it wasn't always seen as the most important aspect of their work. And that's because societally, we don't see road crime as the most important crime, despite the fact that it's actually one of those things that's quite likely to impact on many of us, whereas most of us aren't actually affected by terrorism or serious crime, but we are affected by the things that happen on a day-to-day basis on our roads. And some of the problems this causes are seen in the way that our justice system operates. There's a great phrase that, again, I can't claim credit for. I think this was another Amy one from Road Peace. You say careless, I say dangerous. We've got a system in relation to road traffic offences where somebody falls below a certain standard, the police, the prosecution, the courts have to work out whether that's careless driving or dangerous driving. And to be truthful, it's often something of a lottery. Careless driving is supposed to be driving which falls below the standard of the reasonable and competent, careful driver, and dangerous falls far below. But I know people who think they're perfectly careful and competent when they're driving at 45 in a 30 zone on their mobile phone. And they think they're perfectly careful and competent if they drive when they've had 3 pints. And so if they're on a jury, or if they're a magistrate, or if they're assessing whether somebody else is driving below a certain standard, their own perceptions of their own driving come into play in relation to this. So we have these standards in relation to careful and dangerous driving, which lead to real inconsistency in the way careless and dangerous and errors on the road are dealt with in our justice system. We looked at this really carefully a couple of years ago and prepared a report called Fail to See. Some qualifications to that report because we couldn't access police files, but we did a fairly extensive study of various cases where people either were or were not prosecuted, were or were not convicted, where they failed to see somebody in circumstances where there was no real explanation. And there were a whole series of cases where drivers hit a pedestrian, a cyclist, a motorcyclist. We focused on vulnerable road users. without there being any explanation for why they failed to see them. And what was remarkable is there was completely no pattern as to whether somebody was charged with careless driving, was charged with dangerous driving, was convicted or was not convicted. And the only thing that you could draw as a conclusion was that it was something of a lottery how those standards were applied. And one of our big things at Cycling UK in terms of our campaigning in recent years is to have a review of those laws and the legislation around careless and dangerous driving, so that there's something of a more consistent approach to some of those things. And we've had a similar push in relation to issues about driving disqualifications. When people talk about road justice and road traffic offences and sentencing, I think some people think that those raising it are demanding that people are locked up forever. That's not actually the case. We always hear about the high-profile cases, the tragedies, the worst cases. They hit the press. But actually, the thing that causes a problem for most people is the 95, 96, 97% of general everyday bad driving. That's what bothers most people who cycle. And those cases sometimes come before the court where consideration is given to whether somebody loses their license. Cutting through the stats, when I started looking at this 5 years ago, there used to be about 6,000 people a year driving around on our roads with more than 12 points on their license. And then it was 7, then it was 8, then it was 10, and now it's about 12,000 people. And when I started looking at the stats, there were about 65,000 people a year who lost their license. And then it reduced, and now it's about 34,000. So every year, less people are disqualified. More people are driving with more points on their license without being disqualified. And more people avoid a driving ban, despite being convicted of something which theoretically has an automatic driving ban. And so one of our big pushes is for greater uses of driving disqualifications as a sentencing tool. It's not all about sending people to prison, but disqualifications are about making sure that it's not just a justice issue, but a road safety issue of keeping people who are manifestly unsafe to be on the road, off the road for a period of time. And the reason why some of these problems are important is partly because it gives inconsistent messages and leads to huge dissatisfaction and discontent with victims and families. I'm not going to deal with many case examples today. I'll deal with one. We dealt with a case 3 years ago where a cyclist was killed when somebody was texting, driving their van on an A road and drove straight into him, having failed to see him. That was tragic enough. He was actually prosecuted, dealt with, and that case was dealt with properly. The tragedy of the case was that 6 weeks previously, he'd appeared before the magistrates' courts with 15 points on his licence and pleaded to keep his licence. He had 6 previous convictions for driving whilst texting, and twice had avoided convictions by being sent on a driver rehabilitation course for the same thing. So he'd been stopped 8 times for doing the same things, and on the 9th occasion, still managed to persuade the magistrates that the consequences of him losing his licence were such that he should keep it. And that's one of the things which is a huge thing in our criminal justice system. We should be dealing with disqualifications on a more robust manner. It should be used more often, and that's one of the big things that we've been pushing for. So I would charge through these to give a flavour rather than detail, so I'll skip on because the next thing that I was asked to deal with was roads policing, and so I've posed a few questions and thoughts here. The first one being, why is it needed? And this is seems like a self-evident question, but it's surprising how many people question the importance of roads policing. Studies from across the world repeatedly show that if people think there's a perception that they might get stopped for offending whilst driving, it impacts on their behaviour and they drive differently. The evidence is overwhelming, and that's why there needs to be visible roads policing. It improves driver behaviour and it makes people think about their behaviour and conduct. But unfortunately, as I've already outlined, we've had a massive reduction in the number of roads police. It's important that roads policing is visible so that people have that perception that they might be caught. There was a great phrase that one of the police officers from West Midlands, who've been very proactive in this area, came up with, which is, we can't be everywhere, but we might be anywhere. And that's the attitude that leads to better compliance with road traffic laws. But there is a question about efficient use of resources, and I'm sure that will be touched upon by the superintendent when he speaks. There's limits to what police can do with the resources, which is why they need to be used efficiently. And that touches upon something I'll mention in a moment, which is how police deal with video reporting in an efficient and systematic way. And so far, I've talked quite a bit about what you might call road justice and roads policing and how it matters for everybody that uses the roads. But there is a particular matter about why is this important and relevant for those of us who cycle and those of us those people who might think about cycling. And that's really important because years ago, people talked about road safety with a real concentration on casualty statistics. The truth of the matter is we have government agendas to get more people walking and cycling, and people are put off cycling if they perceive that the roads are dangerous. So it's important beyond simply the casualty figures, because if we want to get our friends, neighbours, family, children riding a bike, our neighbours' kids riding to school, their parents have to actually think that it looks and feels safe, and that involves tackling driver behaviour as well as other issues, I concede, but the tackling of driving behaviour and the perception that it's being dealt with is very important for that. I've only got 2 more slides left. I'm conscious that my 10 minutes is rapidly coming to an end. So I said I would touch on what's worked well in relation to various aspects of roads policing in recent years. West Midlands Police came up with a fantastic scheme a few years ago. Many of you will know about it, but for those that don't, it effectively was a close pass enforcement scheme. Police officers on their bikes with cameras, recording if they were overtaken too close, calling into a colleague in a car, driver being pulled over for education on a big mat which had some distances set out. Really simplistic idea. Key thing about it is it wasn't just enforcement. It was enforcement and education. I've seen the figures for the prosecutions for West Midlands Police. The reality is most people aren't prosecuted. The reality is most people have an educational experience where they are given some words of advice, and the police are very satisfied that most people accept that. Not everybody, I concede, but most people do. But what was brilliant about their work and what was brilliant about those forces that copied that was that it became more than just an enforcement exercise, it became a communications exercise. That's very relevant to the issue of visible enforcement. I was interviewed driving up to the launch of the West Midlands Police close pass operation. I was on the radio with one of the officers involved, and he was asked by the interviewer, how are you dealing with the bad publicity about this? We've got drivers phoning in complaining about this. And the officer said, there's no bad publicity about this. There's none at all. I don't care how many drivers are complaining or phone in about this. If people are talking about what distance you should leave when you overtake a cyclist, we've already succeeded with the operation because people weren't talking about it 4 years ago. And there is an element about that with some of these operations. It is important that there is a communication that these things are happening. I used to think that it made no sense whatsoever for police to say, we're going to be conducting an enforcement operation, because that would make people think, well, we better change our behavior for the day. But actually, it does a great service in terms of getting people to think about it. The experts in that have been actually Surrey Police, who have done some absolutely tremendous work in terms of communicating enforcement action in a way that makes the public think they're doing far more of it than they actually are. In truth, it's a sergeant and a PC doing some police enforcement around Surrey. I'm sure that most of the public and drivers who complain about it imagine that there's a squad of 50 people doing it, but it's actually making people talk about it. The Surrey media are talking about how you might get stopped if you do X, Y, and Z. So I think the enforcement actually also has to be linked with communication, which is why I also put down the third point on this slide about campaigners being positive. I was uneasy writing this, and I was imagining some of the Bristol Road Justice people raising an eye and being a little bit cross with me about putting this, because they've been rightly questioning issues and raising issues for some years. I'll explain the context of this. We spent a lot of time criticising police forces about what they didn't do in relation to road traffic enforcement and traffic enforcement in relation to cyclist issues. I think we have to reflect that you don't get very far in the police service without having a fairly thick skin in terms of criticism. It was incredible how, when we started saying what a fantastic job West Midlands Police were doing, and then Surrey Police, how many police forces wanted us to say nice things about them. So they wanted to actually start doing an operation to actually show that they could do something positive, because police forces don't get much of that positive praise from organisations about these things. So I don't put the campaign as being positive to suggest that people shouldn't raise issues, criticise, flag up concerns. But I think it's worth bearing in mind that actually promoting something good that's happening can also have a huge positive effect in terms of cooperation and public awareness of things. And the final thing I've put down there, what's working well, is a controversial one about targeting the source of the most danger. We've seen police forces across some parts of England and Wales in recent years take the view that if they're doing a driver enforcement exercise, drivers on mobile phones, close passing of cyclists, that what they have to do is a quid pro quo whereby there's an operation targeted at cyclists. It would be stupid of me as a representative of a cycling organisation to suggest that there's never irresponsible cycling, that there aren't matters which cyclists should be prosecuted for. However, if you have limited resources, it's crucial that you target them at the source of the greatest danger. And that's what the best police forces have done in England and Wales in terms of where they put their resources to get the best results, rather than some approach to do with equity and spreading resources so they keep everybody happy. And finally, last slide, what's next? I just thought I'd finish with a couple of things that might be relevant to this overall agenda in the coming year or so. There was a review of roads policing which closed on Monday, so there should be news about developments with that in the next few months. Hopefully, that is going to lead to roads policing being more of a strategic priority for police forces. At the moment, it's not on their list of strategic priorities, so a police and crime commissioner can choose not to make it something that they invest a huge amount of resources to. And on that note, police and crime commissioners are being re-elected next May, so it's your opportunity to ask your police and crime commissioner candidates how seriously they're going to take roads policing, particularly with regard to vulnerable road users. The third point is a bit of a sarcastic one from me. We were very excited 6 years ago when the Ministry of Justice promised to review road traffic offences and penalties. We had an announcement 3 weeks ago saying the government really are now going to do something about this. If I sound cynical, we've been waiting 6 years for this. So there are promises it's coming, but it's been a long time in coming for a full review. And finally, it's not directly relevant to road traffic legislation, but I thought I'd throw it in. There is currently a consultation ongoing about the Highway Code, which is on the Department for Transport website. People have got until the 27th of October to respond to that. There's lots of great stuff in there about prioritising the safety of vulnerable road users. It's not directly relevant to police numbers and some aspects of roads policing or the legislation I've dealt with, but I think it's part of a cultural change which, if pushed through, should make the point that the priority given to vulnerable road users and enforcement of offences that affect them should be increased. And that's it from me, so I will break off at that point and hand over to Amy. Thanks very much for listening, and I hope you found it interesting. I'll be staying on to answer any questions later.
Thank you, Duncan. That was great. Thank you so much. We've got lots of questions, so we will, we'll certainly be coming to all three of you later on. Let's hand over to Amy when you're ready to share your screen. We've got 83 participants on, which is amazing. If you're enjoying the session, do put something on Twitter and share your share the story. Thank you. Over to you, Amy.
Okay, I'll be talking about London's experience. I'll do a quick introduction to Action Vision Zero, who I'm working with now, and then talk about enforcement in London. Some background information to put it in context, some statistics, which you'll be able to compare Avon and Somerset and Met Police to, also the strategy on which the enforcement is based on, and then I'll jump up to what's happening in 2020, because I think it's a different game out there now. And then I'll conclude with highlighting where we think we've seen progress and suggestions for other campaigners. Okay, Action Vision Zero. It's a small initiative and it's dedicated to supporting campaigns to reduce road danger and traffic harm. There are 6 themes it concentrates on. It mainly works with local authorities, but I work in the area of enforcement, and that's what I'm speaking about tonight. And with enforcement, we've been trying to work with the PCCs, trying to identify and promote good practice, because it is the PCCs who are representing the community and their role is to hold the police to account. And that includes in reducing road danger. So we've gone through all the police and crime plans and pulled out what each one say about roads policing, and that'll be published shortly. That's where we started. Okay, in London, big city, and it's got a big road policing command, the largest in Europe, so it's reported. But I just want to stress that number of 1454, that includes all the transport safety officers. So they're responsible for investigating crime on buses in the public transport network. If you want to look at the people that are full-time on road safety, it's the 360 officers and 82 PCSOs. At least that's what the Met Police report in their force management strategy. And then the budget. This is important because we think London is the only area where the Transport Authority actually funds roads policing. And they fund it a lot, almost 2/3 of their money. So just want to put that for background knowledge. Okay, in terms of the enforcement strategy, when Sadiq Khan became mayor, his police and crime plan launched in March 2017. We were so bold, we were so thrilled to see it committed to adopting a Vision Zero approach to road danger, and to be more effective in tackling the places, behaviors, and vehicles that pose the greatest risks to pedestrians and cyclists. So it's great. He was tackling danger at source, and he was reducing the harm to the pedestrians and cyclists. It was another 16 months before the Vision Zero Action Plan was published, and that was a joint plan between the police and Transport for London. And again, I think that's unique for Britain, where the joint road safety plan is between the police and the Transport Authority. It included a chapter in there on enforcement and identified the strategy that roads policing were to take. There was a 3-tier approach. The top tier was on the serious repeat offenders who they wanted to get off the road for multiple reasons. These are known criminals. Tier 2 is really where they focus their effort. It's on the intelligence-led. Out of the 9,000 roads in London, they identified the 132 top, highest risky sections. Which account for about 1 in 6 of the KSIs. And that's where they tried to take a problem-solving approach to. And they did a lot of on-site inspections, analysis capability, and had ongoing enforcement there on a weekly basis, trying to make a difference. And then the last tier, that was the highly visible patrols. Those were like the mass actions when they bring in the other transport officers, and they'd go out with hundreds on the streets, mainly tackling, I'd say, uninsured driving, because TfL data shows that you're much more likely to be involved in a fatal collision if you're uninsured, and also be a criminal. Okay, so how much enforcement is out there? Now these are the statistics from the Home Office. It's the most recent one. We'll get 2019 in a few weeks' time. But we tried to compare the share that's being done by Met Police and Avon and Somerset to their share of reported KSI, the killed and seriously injured. So Met Police account for about 6 times as many KSI as Avon and Somerset. So then if you look at how much enforcement they're doing out there, you can see quite quickly that Avon and Somerset is really good in terms of speeding, but that's with cameras, not so good at all when it's just officer detected. And whereas the Met Police are much better at the ones involving the officers on the street with the speeding, with the careless mobile phone, especially the uninsured, which has been a priority for them. So I just wanted to highlight this, that no matter how much enforcement there is, it's interesting to see where it's being prioritized. Okay, and let's not forget dangerous driving, but that's different statistics. That's from the court, from the Ministry of Justice. I just want to flag up how rare it is for it to be prosecuted. In Avon and Somerset, you're about just over twice a week. London, it's less than 10 times a week, and that almost always results in a conviction. And yes, I know the 112 is more than 109, so it probably had some left over from the previous year in Avon and Somerset. But it's just that, the CPS aren't going to prosecute until they pretty much have a guilty plea or, open and shut case. And it results in a prison sentence for about 50% of the time. And Duncan mentioned the, you say careless, I say dangerous. It's back in about 2012, we held a seminar, a panel debate rather, on this topic. And we had the CPS, we had Cycling UK, we had the magistrates discuss careless and dangerous driving. And we tried to get the Criminal Barristers Association. And I remember talking to them, and they were saying, why are you pushing for dangerous driving? And I was saying, well, we want them to be banned. We want to get them off the roads. And they're saying, well, why don't you just push for more bans for careless driving? And I think they made sense then, and even more so now with the stress our courts are under. So I just want to highlight there when we talk about dangerous driving, how rare it is to be prosecuted. Okay, Met Police, or roads policing, you can't mention it without highlighting the work and the role, the amazing contribution made by Detective Chief Superintendent Andy Cox, who had the lead on road danger until just last month. Now, Andy came to the Met at the end of 2016, and he didn't have a roads policing background. He came for a different position, but he came really committed to transparency and community engagement, and he was a quick learner, and he really took to road danger reduction. And he made such a difference with the priority that we saw from the Met Police being given to enforcement. And not just on the Twitter, where Andy was prolific, but it was just great seeing the commitment of the Met Police to speeding, third-party reporting, and also especially around 20 mile per hour, the lower speed limits, which you'll see later on in the presentation. He'll be much missed, but he would also be the first one to say that there are other people in the Met that are also capable and also dedicated to reducing road danger. So tackling speeding in London, just to flag up that we already have about almost a quarter of our speeding enforcement on 20 mile per hour roads. So 20 mile per hour roads are being enforced. Not quite as much as 30 mile per hour, but it's increasing in recent years. And so we've got 3 ways of enforcing speed limits, as does everyone. Cameras, they account for about 83% of our speeding sanctions, used to be even more. And this will probably be true, this will be true for almost all police forces. It's almost all down to cameras. We've got over 700 speed and red light cameras in London, but we also know, TfL and Met Police are well aware that they're only able to process a fraction of the speed sanctions they detect. So they were really investing in upgrading the back office process, just so they could really could follow through with them prosecuting the offenders they identified. And that has started, and that should make a difference also with third-party reporting. They're also working closer with councils. Councils were campaigning to get speeding decriminalized for a while. They were looking into it so that they would have control of the cameras and also have control of the camera revenue. And the TfL and the Met Police had planned a whole new set of new cameras that were going to be much more flexible. There'd be ones that could work as a set for average speed cameras, but also be standalone. But unfortunately now all of that is on hold due to COVID and the impact on funding. So we're waiting to see what happens. But they had developed a new enforcement strategy on speed. It was quite ambitious. So officer detected speeding, that's about 1/6 of our speeding sanctions. And again, it's gone up in recent years. But even more so since we've launched the road crime team, which I think they originally going to call it the speed enforcement team. But that was launched with 15 officers just in this spring, and they're already now committing to doubling it. And you can see that just when they compare the first 7 months with 2019 with 2020, speed enforcement went up 1.5 times overall, but over 7-fold for 20 mile per hour, which is a huge increase. We're also looking to get our PCSOs to enforce speed limits. That hasn't quite happened. They're apparently empowered, but they haven't been trained. So that should really help us increase our capacity for on-street enforcement. Then Community Road Watch. I know it was started in Avon and Somerset, I believe, Community Speed Watch. London came late to the party, had to change the title. We aim to have two shifts in every borough, but I know in my borough we do 2 a week, and it's increased by 2.5-fold in the past 2 years. So that's another area that's really on the rise. And TfL was also looking into seeing whether or not they could purchase the new kind of cameras or video cameras so that it could be automatically recorded and you wouldn't have to scribble it down at site and then transcribe it back in the office. Okay, in terms of third-party reporting, I just wanted to highlight that it's another area where I'd say London was slow to the party. That used to be the unit where they'd send all the people who are on desk duty, no real commitment. But that changed in recent years under Andy Cox. And they just saw that how the great potential it had for increasing the capacity to enforce. So we've gone from, we almost doubled between 2018 and 2019. And if you look now, talking about 3,000 submissions in 1 month, you know, we could be easily over 25, 30,000 this year. London would say now that they demonstrate good practice and that they lead on third-party reporting on OpSnap. And sorry, I did jump into that. I just assumed to be covered by Duncan. But third-party reporting OpSnap, Operation Snap, that was a scheme initially launched by North Wales, where the public could submit the video camera evidence. And then it was spread throughout all of Wales. But there was still a pretty low, a pretty high percent. There were no further action. Whereas in London, we've got 60 to 70% result in either a warning letter, driver being sent on a driver retraining course, or an FBN. A few actually make it to court, but not many. But also another good thing I'd say we demonstrate good practice is that the person submitting the footage is also told about the outcome. And we think that really, that's really positive feedback. We know they like hearing that. It was great to hear. I believe that has continued after COVID. So just in overall, how effective? Well, our enforcement is increasing, needed to, especially on speeding. But we really appreciate the focus on 20 mile per hour, and the transparency helps. So there is a lot of information that comes out, maybe in drips and drabs on Twitter. But TfL and the Met Police, they for the past maybe 5 years now, they've published an annual roads policing bulletin. And that gives you the statistics on the offenses that are sanctioned at the borough level. So, you know, we would have been able to tell you what was happening in Bristol if Bristol was part of London. It also tells you by speed limit. This is the data that isn't available at the national level, but it does come out slowly. And while that's been the sanctions, it hasn't included the data on close pass or third-party reporting. And we're hoping to get that included in future ones. We would also say they've been really good at working with the community, because I'd say the police appreciate that the public, the community, is key to their ability to enforce speed limits and careless driving, because that's what third-party reporting is leading to. So they've got an enforcement stakeholder working group. We also have a Vision Zero steering group. I think we're, again, the only area in the country that has an enforcement stakeholder working group. So our suggestions for local campaigners: ask, what's your PCC doing to hold the police to account to reduce road danger in their area? And what's the police strategy? When is it being evaluated? And I'd also make sure to ask if careless driving without due care is a priority offense. This is an area we thought we had cracked in London, but we're still having to fight it. And ask to see the data, push for greater transparency. You shouldn't have to wait for 18 months for Home Office data. Find out how the community can help. Because I also agree with Duncan. You know, I mean, I know the PCCs get a lot of demands from their community for road safety efforts, but it's not coming from the government. It's not central government. It's not Home Office. It's not top down. So we really have to be, you know, critical friends, show them tough love. We have to help them and also push them to do more. And also try and find out what your local council is doing to help the police. Don't expect them to fund them, but they can definitely provide more information in terms of speed compliance data. I know they help identify our community road watch sites. And also would just encourage you to continue to work with Action Vision Zero and other campaigners. We need to really be a good joint agreement on what constitutes good practice in roads policing. It's not as straightforward as just increased in enforcement of offenses. There's much more to it. And I'd say we ought to be looking at the areas where the community is key in terms of like community speed watch or third-party reporting, and saying what we say, what we agree is good practice, and trying to hold the police to account for that. Okay, so thanks. Thanks for inviting me to speak. It's always good to be working with Avon and Somerset and Bristol cycling. Learned a lot from you in the past. Continue and expect to learn more tonight. I've included a few links to some key references, I'd say, and also flagging up the upcoming webinars, because this conversation is going to continue even beyond tonight. You've got Road Danger Reduction Forum and Road Peace, who are running 2 webinars in the next few weeks on policing and campaigning. So hope to see you there. And thank you.
Amy, I'm just writing down the dates of those webinars to say again. Was it the 22nd?
And the 29th, yeah.
Both at 4 p.m.
Yeah.
Okay, fab. Thank you so much, Amy. That was really good. Really interesting to see what another force is doing, and some good tips as well of how we can help push the conversation. Okay, let's keep it moving, and we will do questions for. I'll probably pick out who I think is the most relevant speaker to answer the question as they come in at the end. So over to you, Simon.
Okay, thank you. I'll just work out how to share my screen a minute. Bear with me.
You'd have a green button at the bottom in the middle.
Yeah, and I was brought up half a dozen slides I've got in front of me, so I'm trying to work out which one you should be. Hopefully that is working.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, but bear with me because now the other bit isn't working, which is all very awkward. There we are. Okay, with that. So, thanks ever so much for inviting me today. I'm Simon Brickwood, the lead in Avon and Somerset for road safety. So thanks to Steve for the invite, and to Duncan and Amy for those interesting presentations. Having looked at the questions, I do feel slightly like a sacrificial lamb, but I will do my presentations and then we'll see where the questions go. But I have seen a few in there that make me slightly uncomfortable, but we will persevere. So just a little bit background about me. So I became the road safety lead probably about 6 months ago now, and I got promoted to superintendent. And it's fair to say that I came in with a very low level of knowledge because I was a career detective. I've got 28 years in now, and about 24 of those are spent doing investigation CID work. A bit similar to Andy Cox, actually. I wouldn't put myself in his lofty pedestal. So having come into the role, I had quite a lot to learn. And so obviously when I got asked to come along and do this presentation to yourselves, I had a number of things that Steve asked me to cover. And I'm going to try and capture as much as I can do, those areas. It's more based around Avon and Somerset Police, our action around road safety for the whole force area than Bristol. So if you need some specific stuff around Bristol, please put it in the questions, and if I can't answer it tonight, I'll certainly come away and get some more information for you and then feed it back through. So what I want to cover today, I've only got 10 slides to go through. We're on 2 already, so there's only 8 left. Avon and Somerset's road policing strategy, which is a bit dry and dusty to go through, but I'll make it as quick and painless as I can do. The Fatal 5, our operational focus towards vulnerable road users and how we're developing that focus. Whether enforcement or education is the way to go within Avon and Somerset. Victim or witness, I can see some questions pop up along that as to when you, for example, download dashcam, does that make you a victim or a witness? And that's quite an interesting debate because I've got a view which isn't necessarily held by the Criminal Justice Department. My views on third-party reporting I was asked to cover, and the ongoing initiatives to promote careful driving. So the first one then is our road policing strategy and how is it set. So, in essence, the road safety strategy, which was written back in 2018, it's due for renew this year, actually, so it's going to be rewritten. It mirrors that of the national road policing strategy, which is something called Policing Our Roads Together 2018 to 2021. It's freely available to you on the internet if you wish to go through it. But ultimately, we draw our strategy from that, and that national strategy is due for renewal in 2021. So we will again change our strategy around whatever that says. But our vision, there are, I think, 5 different aspects to our vision. The one I've picked out for you is the one you got there, is to ensure the roads of Avon and Somerset will be safe and secure for all road users. Other ones are working with partners, using technology appropriately to reduce the number of people killed or injured, prioritising activities to protect the most vulnerable road users, by which we mean younger people, cyclists, motorcyclists and pedestrians, and making sure that our activities promote public confidence in our communities and in road users. So underpinning all the work we do, based around the national strategy and the force one that we do, there's a national campaign calendar, which I'll cover a little bit later on in my presentation, which the National Road Policing it's got quite a long acronym, but ultimately it's the National Road Policing Operations, Intelligence and Investigations. Throughout the year they have numerous campaigns which every police force engages in. To different levels depending upon the force, but it'll be, for example, speeding, it might be wearing seatbelts, it might be the wrong type of child seat. Christmas time we always have Operation Tonic, which is a big drink drive thing, and ultimately that's kind of coordinated centrally, and Avon and Somerset Police just go in line with that calendar. All the activity that we do is delivered against it's called the Safe System approach to road safety, and the Fatal 5, which I covered, and that comes in the next slide actually, where I just cover what that is. The Safer System approach, it was started off in Sweden. It's got 4 components around having safer roads, safer speeds, safer vehicles and safer road use. Again, if you want to look it up, it's easily found on Google. It's quite an interesting read, to be fair, but it just explains that road safety is everyone's responsibility around those 4 key areas. All the campaigns that we do, as are other campaigns by other forces, are evaluated nationally. We use that evaluation to improve future campaigns. The national campaigns, as I've said, from NROP, OII, they all collate all the data from the forces that engage in it, and again future campaigns, because they tend to repeat on an annual basis, albeit there may be the occasional bespoke one which comes in, are amended dependent upon the feedback from before. So we use data extensively to better understand how and why things happen. We've got a really good analytical tool called ClickSense, which goes across every aspect of police work in Avon and Somerset. Every bit of data that we have from all crimes, from all road traffic incidents, from intelligence, it all goes via ClickSense, and it's one of the best tools that in my 28 years of service I've seen any police force have in terms of enabling us to identify where the priority areas are of any crime, including road safety matters, and ensuring that we use our resources effectively to deal with it. And in order to decide how we tackle those areas that are identified, we use something called a problem-solving approach called SARA, which again is kind of a nationally recognised problem-solving system. It stands for Scanning, Analysis, Response and Assessment. You scan the data, you analyse what it means, you come up with your response, and you assess how effective it is. And again, it kind of links into what I mentioned about the analytical work being done on a national basis with the campaigns that we engage in, because we see what works and then what doesn't work, and we can therefore amend our practice in the future. So I've kind of canted through that, but that's kind of what our road policing strategy is and where it comes from, how we prioritise what we do. So the Fatal 5 and the Safe System approach, the slide here is, it's an asset that we have, which we recently purchased. in the process of being finished off. When it collapses, it's kind of the size of a kebab van, I suppose, to use the best police analogy that I can come up with. It folds out. We take it along to, or we will be taking it along to community events. It's still in the process of being, well, it was on the day I turned up because I was inspecting the stuff, but it was in the process of being finished off. So on the left, you can see what the safe system approach is all about, which I've covered already. On the right over here, you have the fatal five, which are the top factors in serious injury collisions. So it's drink and drug driving, not wearing a seatbelt, drivers being distracted, inappropriate or excess speed, and careless and inconsiderate driving. Those statistically are recognised on an international basis as the most significant factors in serious injury collisions. So this asset, when it's finished, the roof bit, if you like, the bit that's plain at the moment, that's finished now, and it is now showing, if you like, a kind of a driver's eye view of what it looks like to be cut out of a car that you've crashed in. So there's a TV screen in front of you. You can see there's TV screens on either side as well, and we use it really as an education device for drivers. They go in, they see footage of car crashes and education around the fatal five, and as they come out, they look up and they see what it looks like if they if they've been involved in a collision and need the fire brigade to come and cut them out. This was a bit of a spontaneous shot, so I apologise about the dirty rag at the front and the traffic cone and the generator at the back. I'll try and do something more professional for the future. But ultimately, what we have is a range of assets such as this. We've got a vehicle that was involved in a fatal collision where the family have kindly allowed us to use it as an educational tool that hit a motorcyclist and tragically killed the motorcyclist. We have cars that have been seized under insurance and crushed, and various other educational tools and quite impactful bits of material that we take out to community events or to schools or to fairs, whatever, to educate people the dangers of of what can go wrong when their driving falls below the expected standards. So our operational focus, as I kind of alluded to at the beginning, really, we always aim to direct our efforts where there's a greater chance of risk or harm. And part of that comes from something which has only been introduced in our force in the past 2 or 3 months, really. There's a guy called Damien Devaney within the road policing unit, who some of you will know quite well. He's a very keen cyclist, but more to the point, he is the one that provides all the data that's required, or when there's freedom of information request around, for example, how many people we put on speed awareness courses over the past year, which I think is one of the questions that comes up. So Damien, using click sensors, developed a kind of we call it a road policing tasking model. Our road policing unit is far smaller than it used to be. It's not as small as other forces. I mean, the Met, it's always dangerous to make comparisons between police forces, because unless they are of a similar size, the figures can be slightly misleading. The Met has a much larger road policing unit, but it's got a much larger area to cover as well. So we did lose our capacity to some extent around road policing. It's never gone, and it's expanded to where it was, but it's certainly smaller than it was 5-10 years ago. However, they are very keen on working alongside us, because they're a separate entity to the road safety unit, to target persistent offenders, drink drivers, disqualified drivers, where we have the intelligence coming in to say they're regularly doing it. And that's what ClickSense, the Intel model, is really good at, because it can collate all those things and it looks to identify the highest priority areas, and we then make sure that our resources from the RPU, from the road policing unit, can go there. And we've had some good successes with it, but ultimately it goes where the greatest harm or risk is on the roads. Now, when we talk about the fatal five, as I've mentioned a couple of times, it's probably important to point out that we will put our resources where the highest danger is, and it's of significance that when we have a serious injury accident or a fatal accident, the unit that goes out is part of the RPU. It's the collision investigation unit. And in 2020, I did a little number crunch of the incidents they've attended, and of the top 10 groups of vulnerable people, the top 10 groups of people that have been involved in or that have been victims of such accidents, motorcyclists are currently the highest one. They account for about 31% of all incidents, serious incidents that the collision investigation unit go to. They have they had 4 fatalities. Tragically, there was another one last night. So it's gone up to 5 fatalities this year. Cyclists, by comparison, they're ninth, in terms of the frequency and severity of incidents, with 8 or so one fatal in this year. And the way in which we ensure that we are working collaboratively with as many people as possible is that we work with local cycling groups across the force. We work with local authorities across the force, and they support and inform whatever operations we're doing of a proactive measure. For example, a more recent example I can give you, which is ongoing at the moment, we've got a multi-agency approach in relation to cycling safety within Taunton. We've got the Taunton area cycling campaign, and also Somerset Road Safety. And we're working with the local authority around looking at promoting safe cycling and use of cameras on bikes, which I know is quite a hot topic at the moment. And in terms of developing that operational focus, dash cam is a really important part of what we're doing for cycle safety at the moment. The numbers around dash cam have kind of increased exponentially since we brought it in, and certainly we're encouraging that to continue. And I know there'll be some questions around dash cam and the accessibility of data around what's happened to those particular incidents, and we will come on to that. One other thing that we're doing, although I'm going to talk about enforcement and education on the next slide, it's fair to say that the education side of things, when we do go down the line of that, it tends to be letters sent to the offending driver, and effectively saying, you've been caught driving carelessly, because dangerous driving is inevitably going to result in a prosecution, I would suggest. But if it's careless driving, sometimes it's a prosecution, sometimes it's education. The letters that we send out, we weren't particularly happy with. They just didn't seem to be quite impactful enough. So we worked with Bath University and University of West of England to look at those letters to sort of try and make sure that the wording of them encourage people to address their behaviours and to change their behaviours in the future. So we send out 40,000 letters every year in relation to those driving offences. And we just want to make them as impactful as possible. So the messaging has recently changed in relation to those. Another thing that we're doing, or that we're developing in Avon and Somerset, is the use of bike cameras. So we are starting to deploy police officers with bike cameras dressed in different outfits. So outfit sounds a bit wrong, they're not in clown suits. I mean, they're dressed as a delivery driver, or dressed as a police officer, or dressed as a as a cyclist wearing cyclist gear. And the idea behind that is to do a kind of close pass style operation, and we're working with Somerset Road Safety around that at the moment, specifically down in Taunton, where there'll be some publicity around this, some signage being put up, and whatever figures we get on the back of that will be used as an ongoing media campaign, again, to highlight the issues for the wider public. And we use social media in this force a lot. There's a dedicated road policing Twitter account which has got regular updates on it. The PCC for Avon and Somerset, Sue Stevens, is a huge advocate of road safety. It's one of her priorities. It was built into the police and crime plan really from the day she landed, when she set out her vision with the Chief Constable. Road safety and particularly cyclists are a big focus for her, and I have regular meetings with her where we talk through what road safety initiatives we're doing, where she makes sure, I have to make sure she's happy with what we're doing. So whereas some other PCCs may not have quite that level of focus, Sue is very much on the side of road safety and safe cycling, which is great, to be honest. So the question of enforcement or education. It's fair to say that for many people, the fear of being caught a second time is a key factor in why they choose not to do something. So if, for example, they receive a letter to say you've been seen driving carelessly, you're getting a warning letter this time, but if you do it again, it'll be prosecution, which is a truncated version of what the letter says. For many people that works, and for many people they don't then offend again. It doesn't work in every case, and in those circumstances, if it's a second offence, or if that first offence is like so far below the standard that we would be willing to go down the education route, then enforcement is done. So again, I kind of was working on the assumption that we don't actually prosecute that many people, and I was actually quite surprised because these figures only came out yesterday. We had the 6-month figures, but this is as of the end of September. So using the dashcam portal that we have on our website, we received 30, or just over 1,300, of which 90% have resulted in a positive outcome. And of those 1,300, just under half were prosecuted. And slightly less than half, and less than prosecutions received a warning letter, and 130 with no further action, which would have been for any number of reasons. Which, if you need the details, then you can always, because I don't have the information, but it will be because either the evidence wasn't sufficient, or that there's no registered keeper for the vehicle. There'll be lots and lots of reasons as to why. But the level of prosecutions was a bit of a surprise to me, and it's it would appear to be comparable probably with most police forces in terms of where we are with that. I know there's some questions that will be coming up around, do we think we should enforce more, educate more? There's always going to have to be a balance between it, because partly because of capacity for the courts, capacity for the criminal justice system as a whole, but also because as Duncan said, I mean, there's a clear evidence base that educating people actually does change their behaviours, and that's why there's always going to be a combination of enforcement and education with Avon and Somerset's approach to the drivers that are found, with their careless driving. So I suspect this might be the hot topic of the evening in terms of me made to feel really uncomfortable. So, are you a victim or a witness when you submit dashcam data? The 2015 Victims Code, which is a Victims Code of Practice, kind of covers this to some extent, and that's why I got the quote there. And I'll say from the outset that I think most cyclists should be victims. All right, so I'll get that out there. It's just that it's a bit of an uphill struggle getting other people to take my view. So I'll explain the background to you. So the Victims Code links into something called the Victims Directive, which again is a kind of a Home Office document. And the Victims Directive, and all this is on the internet if you want to look it up. And I would suggest you do if you're particularly animated around feeling that you should be a victim, not a witness, because the legislation is probably there to help you. The Victims Directive confers rights on people who have suffered harm caused directly by any criminal offence. Now, it comes down to what the definition of harm is, all right, because under the criteria, under that Victims Directive, harm is classified as either physical, mental, or emotional, which broadly speaking is the definition of harm for any criminal offence. So if you suffered physical, mental, or emotional harm as a result of a cycling near miss or close pass, or whatever offence you're talking about, technically you are a victim, I would suggest. So the 2015 Victims Code, the Victims Code of Practice, expanded the criteria of a victim, because it used to just relate to what's called trial bleed array or indictable offences, to summary only offences, which includes careless driving. Specifically, and this is a direct quote from the website, road traffic matters and regulatory offences which are reported to the police. So my view on it is that if we have a clear careless driving, where I do apologise, I've got my lights on a timer in here and it does irritate me if I'm not moving around enough, switch off. My view is that if you are involved in a near miss incident where you have suffered mental or emotional harm, you're a victim, all right? There is absolutely no point in making up that you suffer mental or emotional harm, but I saw in the questions there was, I apologise, I didn't write the name of the lady down, but a woman saying that a van, a transit van, driving directly towards her and terrified, and it was very, very frightening. That for me is mental or emotional harm, and I think that should have been dealt with as a victim. I have no control personally over what happens to those dashcam offences. It goes in to the criminal justice department, and they're assessed by leaders within the criminal justice department, you know, kind of team leaders, and they decide whether they feel that the individual involved is a victim or a witness. In the vast majority of cases, they are classifying cyclists who submit the data as witnesses. Only out of the 1,300, I think 1,100 was the figure I was given actually when I asked for it. Of the 1,100 reports that we had, 6 people were classified as victims this year. And for me, that's not right. And so I'm having an ongoing dialogue with the gentleman in charge of the criminal justice unit to try and get that changed. He's going to come back to me to when he's worked out for himself why only 6 people are classified as victims, because that data's only come through to me today. He's going to come back to me and we'll have a further discussion. So, and Damien Devaney, who I've mentioned already, feels very strongly, as do I, that far more of you should be considered victims. So all I can say to you, although I haven't got any answers for you today, is that it is something that I've got strong views on, and I will do what I can do to get that changed, because it's not good enough at the moment in Avon and Somerset. I don't know where we compare to other forces, but I definitely think there's room for improvement there. And in relation to the dashcam side of things, because we have a very good dashcam system, and we're seen as one of the leaders in the country actually around it, because we introduced it quite early on, and we've got a very effective portal to put it through. We're part of the National Dashcam Group, and that National Dashcam Group, which most forces are part of, just ensures the process is correct. So there may be some stuff that comes out of the National Dashcam Group around the same subject. And again, one thing that I think we don't do particularly well within this force, and you know, again, part of it is down to lack of resourcing, part of it is down to the budget cuts, where we just don't have as many people working in the criminal justice department as we did, because if you're a victim, then under the Victims Code of Practice, you're entitled to regular updates. So those 6 people that were classified as victims would or should have received regular updates about what's happening with their particular case as it's going through the court. The more victims we classify, clearly there's going to be an impact upon the workload of the people that need to manage that. And that, I suspect, may be part of the problem. But again, I will find out. The Met Police, funnily enough, you know, which Amy may be able to expand upon, take a view that they feed back on every individual report they get, and they took that view from quite an early stage. But from the National Dashcam Group, they're actually really regretting doing that, because the volume of work it's created has become a huge issue for them. And so there's probably going to need to be some sort of balance, even from the Met, in terms of how that goes on in the future. But there's certainly areas around whether you're a victim or witness that I think you know, I can help improve, and I will do. So third-party reporting, I'll canter through this because I'm conscious of the time. I mean, you know, headcam footage is a really good example of it. I am completely in favour of it. I think it's a fantastic tool. I think it's a really, really good way to identify and either educate or enforce the poor driving of the people on our roads. So, like I say, the portal we got for dashcam and helmet and bike cameras is pretty intuitive. It's very good. 90% success rate in terms of what comes out of it. The National Dashcam Working Group was set up by the Met, and again, that's just looking at doing a consistent approach to across all police forces to how we prosecute or process those offences. Very recently, the HMIC FRS, as it's now called, but everyone kind of still knows it as the HMIC, but they now do Fire and Rescue Services. They did a review on a national level of road policing, and the report came out probably about 2 months ago now, and they came up with a number of recommendations, including greater intelligence function for police forces, specifically for road safety, greater use of third-party reporting, but there was a specific recommendation over you know, a wide use of dash cam and helmet camera footage. So we're in quite a good position, you know, within Avon and Somerset around that, but many other forces will now need to start, you know, getting on board in relation to that, where they're not at the moment. So third-party reporting, both myself, the entire road safety team, and the criminal justice staff, whether or not they consider you as individuals to be victims or witnesses, you know, we are very keen on doing that and expanding it as much as possible. So again, just to close off, because I've only got, this is the last slide really. Our initiatives to promote careful driving are all based around, well, they're not all based around, they are partly based around the NPCC calendar. We take an evidence-based approach to those campaigns. So we link in with the National Road Policing Operations, Intelligence and Investigations Unit. Everything we do is based around the Fatal Five, so speeding, mobile phone distractions, drink drive offences. They will always remain a high priority for us because unfortunately they continue to be prevalent in society and in driver behaviours. Targeting those offenders, which is specifically what we do, will improve the safety of all road users, particularly the vulnerable road users, of which cyclists are clearly one of the main factors. And those on two wheels, whether it's motorbikes or cyclists, as I've kind of mentioned in the previous statistics, will, I think, always remain a priority for us in terms of what we do. So multi-agency working, funneling our forces or funneling our resources through intelligence to make sure we go to the appropriate areas. We do a lot of work around speed cameras. I think it was shown on the on the slide that Amy demonstrated. We are really good on speed enforcement. We've got a big speed enforcement unit which is just dedicated to all that camera stuff. And ultimately, the PCC, whilst she remains in post, and I hope that the next PCC takes the same approach, because they may have different priorities, but hopefully not, will always make sure that that road safety and cycling remains very much at the forefront of Avon and Somerset's activity. So thank you very much for your time. I now sit here waiting for the questions that are going to make me squirm. I shall now stop sharing.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah. That was brilliant. Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yeah. Let me scale my screen.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, sorry. I've been furiously writing down questions. I've never used a pen so much. Let's skip to the issue of dashcam footage and the reporting back. We've had some good feedback from James that the portal is very easy to use. So compliments to you on that. Just before I forget, we've put up our email address there, roadjustice@Bristol Cycling. So if you have or do submit a case or a report and you're not happy with the outcome or the lack of knowledge of what the outcome is, then do get in touch with us and we can follow up using some of the contacts that are on the call this evening and others. So should we just get Amy, or we'll go to Amy maybe first to give your very quick opinion on the issue of victim or witness, and then maybe we'll get the same from Duncan, if that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, we were really happy when we got the mayor in London to agree that all victims in road crashes would be assumed to be, all casualties in road crashes in London would be assumed to be victims of crime until the contrary is proved. That was a few years ago. But I was writing in the chat that it really shouldn't make a difference, because there's a witness charter, and it says on page 20 that the police will keep you regularly updated on progress during the investigation of a serious criminal offense. If the crime is less serious, the police will provide you with contact details so you can find out what stage the investigation has reached. You will be informed on the conclusion of the investigation, e.g. charge caution. So I would think that witnesses should also be kept informed.
Okay, so regardless of whether they are a victim or a witness, either way they should be kept informed. Is that what you just said? Yeah, just to clarify.
Yeah, Tom, that is right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But a forced decision was made that the witness side of things, and this isn't specifically for road safety, it's for many offences, will not be updated. So there is a victims charter, there's a witness charter. The witness charter clearly says that witnesses should be updated for serious criminal offences, but also at the end of non-serious offences should still be told what the resolution is. Avon and Somerset don't do that. Okay.
We'll go to Duncan quickly, again on your take on this issue, perhaps.
Very quickly, we've got a bit of an odd system where there are some forces across England and Wales that are basically treating everybody in, let's say, a close past video reporting incident as a victim, and other forces are treating everybody as a witness. I understand entirely Simon's approach, and I credit him for the explanation he's given of the issue about whether you've suffered harm, physical, mental, or emotional in relation to it. I think Avon are getting the balance wrong in relation to that in terms of the number, and Simon's conceded that have been treated as a victim as opposed to a witness. If I could put in one simple explanation, I'm probably the exception that proves the rule. Most people who report a close pass, I think, are probably victims. There's the odd person like me. I'm 52. I've been cycling most of my life. I've been cycling and racing for 10 years since I was 10. I'm not actually that fazed, to be perfectly blunt, by close passes. I find them annoying, but I'm the exception. But I'm not the person who is intimidated by it. So if I was treated as the witness, it wouldn't be the end of the world. But I suspect I'm one of about 2 or 3%, to be perfectly honest. I suspect most people are in the witness, or should be in the victim category. I do get the point that there's the odd person that's reporting it because they think it's the right thing to do because it affects other people, but they are not themselves personally put in fear or harm. But I think that's the minority, and occasionally that touches on someone like me. But most people, I think, should be treated certainly as in the victim category.
Okay, we've got a question from Vicky, who says, this is for you, Simon, to say, are you limited by resource in dealing with the camera submissions? Is that an issue for you, or is that not an issue?
No, dash cam, they're not limited by resource. They all get done. I mean, because of the triage that's put in place prior to the uploads, all the stuff that comes through, with the small exception that I showed on the statistics, will be positively actioned, whether it's by way of enforcement or education. There's no issue of resourcing around that. Okay,
we've got a question. Can we submit stills instead of the actual footage? A comment that is quite time consuming to cut and crop and download all your footage. Would the portal accept stills, or could it in the future accept stills of, for example, a close pass?
I don't know if it accepts stills, but evidentially it would never be accepted because you need the footage. Stills can be doctored is kind of what the unfortunate reality of it is. So okay. Even if you could accept it, it just wouldn't work from a legal perspective.
Okay, we'll continue on this train. What are you doing to sort of promote the reporting of close passes? And I guess as more and more people get the cameras and hopefully the cost continues to come down of those cameras, are you doing or planning anything to promote the fact that you can do this?
It's a very good question. I think I'll probably have to come back with a slightly more detailed answer on. So we do a lot of work with local authorities, as I say. If there's a specific close pass operation, that'll be well advertised just through that partnership work. It's obviously on our website. It's on the Twitter account. But in terms of specific publicity around it, to be honest, I don't know. Damien will, and I can come back to you and you can feed it to the individual that asked the question.
Okay, that's great. What else have we got here? We've got, do we use average speed cameras in Bristol? And if not, I guess why?
Average speed cameras are used. They're primarily used on the motorways. The M32, for example, has got them there. In terms of smaller roads, I mean, it effectively comes down as a fairly limited capacity. But yeah, that they are used, and they are enforced the same as non-average speed cameras. I mean, the use of community speed watch, which I think was mentioned before, is I mean, we've got a very big community speed watch system within all of Avon and Somerset. Damien again oversees that, and again, I can't extol its virtues enough. It was suspended during COVID for understandable reasons, because there's a need for two people to be quite close together, and all the social distancing measures. But if we're talking about specific areas that we think there should be an average speed camera, which would indicate to me that whoever's asked the question may have a particular area in mind, I would suggest community speed watch would be probably a more effective way of doing it.
Okay, let's just see who else we've got. We've got a few suggestions that Bristol Cycle Campaign could help promote that. We've got a suggestion that maybe we can run something in view of the upcoming PCC election next year around this victim or witness issue. What else have we got questions on? We've got a question: should jurors with previous convictions for traffic offences declare an interest? I guess implying that maybe jurors, comes back to the start of Duncan's piece about maybe jurists don't see it necessarily as much of a crime as perhaps some others. Should we go with you for that one, Duncan? Is that an issue?
Yeah, I'll slightly dodge the question about the previous convictions and answer it in a broader way, if that's all right. We are culturally wedded in this country to the right to people have jury trial in certain circumstances. And we have jury trials in relation to some driving matters, where it's one of those peculiar offences where it's a particularly complex for members of the public to determine upon. There is a right to jury trial in serious cases, but serious offences. But in relation to theft and criminal damage, I'm sorry to be a legal geek here, but in relation to theft and criminal damage, we do not allow people to have jury trial unless the value or seriousness exceeds a certain amount. And I think there is a case for having non-jury trials, professional trials, keeping stuff in district judge magistrate court level for some of the driving offences that currently go before a jury. And I think that would simplify matters. We have a creaking criminal justice system. I'm veering slightly off the road traffic stuff here, but the Crown Court cannot cope with the amount of stuff that's going to it at the minute. We do need to keep some further stuff out of Crown Court jury trials because they don't have the capacity to deal with it. And some road traffic cases that currently go to the Crown Court could be dealt with by a professional district judge. And I think that would simplify matters and make it a more consistent way of dealing with matters. And I say that, I have to say, having in a previous life both prosecuted and defended road traffic matters. So I see it from both perspectives, but a jury trial doesn't work for some of those things.
Okay, thank you very much. We've got questions on speed. Comments that we're very lucky in Bristol to have, or maybe not lucky is the right expression, but we have 20 mile an hour speed limits on most of our roads. But enforcement is very challenging. And someone's commented they're pointless without the means to enforce. Is there anything on that you can speak of? Maybe come to you first, Simon. And my question on that is the police force's input to design on that sort of thing? There are many roads in Bristol. I'm sure we can all think of one that are just very wide, and by design, people drive faster than the speed limit. Should we go to you, Simon, and maybe to Amy as well?
Yeah, so the speed limits are set by the local authority, basically. So we have very limited influence over where they are, albeit we do work with the local authority to identify, developing areas that, that have an increase in accidents, for example. in actual fact, there are some studies that show that 20-mile-an-hour limit zones are ineffective, which is slightly contentious. But working on the basis that we collectively agree that they are effective, they tend to be in fairly not isolated, but in the streets that are off the main roads, and as a result, they don't tend to get much focus from the police unless there are specific reports that are coming in to say on this particular road there's an increase in speeding, in which case there will be, we've got a speed enforcement unit, which is part of my team in road safety, a combination of motorcyclists and vans and cars. I've got some mobile kit as well, and they will go and do an operation on that road, and either will be successful or unsuccessful in terms of finding the people that are speeding. And again, I would come back, because of the areas and the streets we're talking about tend to be quieter in terms of the volume of traffic going down them. Not always, but the majority of them. The use of the local residents and community speed watch, and that whole volunteer cohort that we have, which again are my responsibility, would be the most effective way of tackling that. Because of the resources we've got, any enforcement around a particular 20-mile-an-hour street would be fairly time limited. We'd run it for a day, a week, for if we told it happens on a Thursday afternoon, then we'd be there Thursday afternoon for a couple of weeks, but it wouldn't be a permanent feature. Whereas a scheme such as community speed watch, which is set up on that street, would probably be a far better long-term solution.
Okay, thank you for that. Amy, have you got any comments on that particular issue?
I apologize. I was reading the chat, so I missed the question.
It's just around the speed enforcement and what the police can do around those 20-mile-an-hour roads, where it's just by design people do go a lot quicker than that, and how the police and how us as a city can work around that issue. Yeah.
Well, I think we've seen over the recent months some quick interventions to change design, so hopefully it'll be affected that way. But I would agree with Simon in that the police can at least complement community speed watch efforts. So they can't be there every day, but that's what we were trying to do in London, is that where there were sites that had regular community speed watch monitoring schemes, that occasionally they would be there actually enforcing as well. Okay, thank you. We'll just have a last couple of questions. Let me just dig. The chat's moving so quickly. So this is probably for Simon. Do you agree that longer driving bans are a strong deterrent? Question.
Yeah, it's a difficult one to say because it will be for some and not for others. People that are determined to speed and determined to drink drive and determined to disqualify driver, a long driving ban will make no difference at all to their behaviours, particularly disqual drivers, because they're banned already. So whether they're banned for 5 years or for 25 years, they still carry on driving, and that's why we have the intelligence-based road policing activity, where those drivers are the ones that will go and catch and to be blunt, get them and put in prison. I think it will be a deterrent for many people. If it's a choice between being banned for 18 months or for 5 years, particularly if a driving ban is going to impact upon their lifestyle because they need to drive for a living, which many people do, then that will make a difference. So I'm not trying to dodge the question, but ultimately it'll work for some, but not for others, depending upon their mindset and their criminality level.
I've seen suggestions on some of Andy Cox's threads, brilliant threads about that if you're not insured or are disqualified, you shouldn't be able to fill up with petrol, sort of an automatic system that you won't be able to fill up with petrol if you're not insured or disqualified. Mm. Have any of you ever come across such suggestions in a sort of in a serious context in your work? Are there any things that we can do to stop uninsured or disqualified drivers actually driving?
I'd say that Britain has been very proactive in confiscating vehicles from uninsured drivers. And I think that the extent has gone down a lot in recent years, especially since they introduced that law that you had to have continuous insurance. So they got a lot more people that way. But we think that you ought to be learning from Canada, where they've introduced short-term vehicle impoundments for, like, they call them low-level drink drive offenders. So it'd be a first-time offense, no casualties or no child in the car, and a low level of drink driving. And they'll confiscate the vehicle for just a few days. But it's an out-of-court sanction. And because they found that if you had to take the driver to court to get a driving ban, or to get a prosecution, conviction, or a driving ban, it was just too time consuming for them. So they went for these short-term sanctions that the police had control of. And they said it made all the difference in deterring drink driving. And they also extend it for, like, really extreme speeders, but it's much more used around drink driving in Canada. And it just seems like, I just wish we confiscated vehicles for drivers that were speeding or using their mobile phone. Or we don't even do it for drink driving. We only do it for uninsured driving. And I think that's crazy.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. Duncan, any thoughts on that from yourself?
Yeah, I find our reluctance to disqualify people from driving and to disqualify them for longer mind-boggling, to be perfectly honest. It's one of the most effective ways of actually making people think about their behaviour. If people realised that there was a reasonable possibility that they would be disqualified for a lengthy period of time, that would concentrate people's minds about their behaviour. I think it's the one area of sentencing and dealing with offenders that we should be far more robust about, and actually far more robust about driving while disqualified. It has the capacity to really concentrate and focus people's minds. And we don't do it because we have a cultural approach that driving is an entitlement. If we had one that it was a privilege, we'd take a different view to disqualification.
Okay, thank you very much. We've got a question here. I don't actually know what this means, so you might have to give some context on this as well, Simon. So, has Avon and Somerset now accepted auto speed watch evidence? So first of all, what is that, and then the question, please, if that's okay.
Okay, Auto Speed Watch is it's a privately run company that works with parish councils and kind of puts a box up in villages and captures data of all the traffic coming through, and it's almost like a portable speed camera. The idea behind it being that any offences are flagged up, captured, and forwarded to the relevant police force to do stuff with. We in Avon and Somerset don't use Auto Speed Watch without getting into details around it, because it's quite a complicated story. We sought advice from the Surveillance Commissioner, who is of the firm view that it breaches data protection laws and particularly surveillance laws. And we also, in the end, took advice from our legal services department, who said the same thing. So we don't endorse or use Auto Speed Watch. Okay,
that's great. Thank you very much. We'll make that the last question. Otherwise, we could be here for a while. Yeah. So thank you all for coming. To everyone that's come along this evening. It's great to get such attendances at these sort of events. Thank you to our three speakers. Really interesting. A lot of information. A lot of, I think, actions for the general public, members of the cycle campaign, maybe the cycle campaign as well, to take away and think about. And yeah, I think just gives a lot more context to how the system works, how the system could work better. And yeah, lots of things probably for people to follow up, which is brilliant. As I said earlier, if you are having an issue with a case, there's an email address there. You can get in touch. If you want to just generally follow the cycle campaign, we're on all the usual social media. We have a meeting every first and third Thursday of every month on Zoom, as it stands. And yeah, we could perhaps focus one of those on dangerous driving, and or make that a theme for a month, for example, and try and pull some of the people that are interested and have come along this evening into the conversation. Yeah, as I said earlier, thanks to the members that help us put on these for free, because it's great not to have to charge people. And yeah, thanks to Mark, Rob, Steve, and Toby for sort of organising this event. I'm just the compere, so I don't take any credits this evening. And yeah, thank you very much. We'll probably stick around to answer a couple more questions if people want to, but yeah, thank you very much. And yeah, thanks to, hopefully we can do another one.
Thank you.
Thank you.